Okay. Okay, so I think we can start. So yeah, thank you Eva for the introduction, and it's actually very interesting that you said about exhibition, because we never gave before any presentation or talk about exhibition itself, so it's our first try. So we are fairly nervous in, and it was very interesting to prepare it and try to reflect, try to understand which message do we put in this, like what is exhibition to us. And we understood that from one side, exhibitionism is a tool to first self-reflect, and on the other hand, it's a very important tool to us to produce new meanings and new ideas, which afterwards we often try to incorporate in our projects or promote in other concepts. And as you already started, we are three partners, and yes, we were very upset in the very beginning to give this lecture in Zoom. At the beginning, it was scheduled as a live lecture in analog format, but the fact that we're doing it Zoom, it allows us to all of us be present during this talk, which is not so often. So on this image on the left side, you can see Leonid Slanimsky. In the middle is myself, Artem Kitaev, and on the right side is Leonid. And we called the lecture Cosmos Chaos, and we call it because it's the name of the first exhibition which we did. And in these words, Cosmos Chaos, Cosmos as a like Greek word of in Greek means order, and we use the antonym of this word chaos as a disorder. So that was the idea which we put on this exhibition, that we kind of try to look for inspiration in everything what's around us, and we call it chaos. And then we kind of pretentiously saying that the order we should make out of this chaos, we align in our projects and create our cosmos, our architecture. Yeah, with all the respect, but it was the name of the exhibition which we gave it 6 years or 5, I think, years ago. But let me start from the beginning. So we started 3 friends, 3 students, and like many of you, we started with a small competitions, and we did cinema in the park, museum in the park, another museum in the park, bus stop, museum in Denmark of Hans Christian Andersen. We did a public space competition in New York, competition for renovation of one square, big square in Moscow, cultural space in Moscow, small pavilion for the bicycle tourists in France, an installation in the park in Moscow, and then we were invited to create this exhibition. And that was the moment when we finally tried to look back and understand what exactly interests us in what exactly are we looking for, because in the very beginning we just created projects, tried to do something what we think is cool, interesting, and then there was a point when certain moment you're looking back and try to understand, to formulate what is the concept, what is your approach to architecture. And that was a very important step, this exhibition in Central House of Artists in the middle of Moscow, where we collected all the projects which I mentioned before, which we did by then, and tried to understand what inspired that, these projects. And as I said, we call it Cosmos and Chaos, Cosmos as our projects and Chaos as the references which we use to create these projects. And we created this installation in the shape of a circular table, where we placed right on the table all the references which inspired the projects. And the projects themselves, they're kind of hovering on top of them, on top of the references, kind of showing how the idea is growing out of different material samples, sprinklers, lights, either stones or different seeds, strange structures, different references, architectural and mainly non-architectural. And especially we were by then interested in different engineering devices and some kind of construction materials. And this was developed further. We kind of, that moment, we realized we formulate our main direction of interest of our projects, and we try to formulate it better in the next projects, in the next exhibition called Swiss Art Awards. Nikolai, would you continue?
Yes. So hi everyone. The Swiss Art Awards was in 2017 in Basel, and as in many of our previous projects that Artem just showed, we draw a lot of inspiration from industrial and infrastructural side of architecture, from various materials. And what was really interesting for this particular project is that once in a while you have an option to work outside of architecture but in framework of art. So we tried to push our approach in a way to limit and to reduce the palette of those elements that we work in architecture in a traditional way to a very limited number of elements. And for example, all these elements that you can see, this is these cones that protect people from walking somewhere, the spikes that are against for birds, the plastic wrap that protects people from like trespassing or hurting themselves. These are all elements that architecturally, they're never part of the project. They're never considered as part of architecture aesthetics. There's a sort of mute elements that somehow appear at the very end of construction. And like when we look at the buildings, we kind of like mentally like avoid paying attention to them. So we tried this time to use only these elements and create in a way stacked almost like in classical architectural way, like architectural order, a wall out of these elements, and to see if we can find a new aesthetics within these elements, to see how this like spiky spikes work against the soft materials, how like polished metal works against the orange color, and to find some sort of like new approach, some beauty and tension within those elements that traditionally excluded.
Probably Leonid will
Yeah, here
continue.
I will.
Now we will switch. Now we'll pass microphone quite often because it's three of us, so it will be via Zoom, not so smooth. But anyway, Leonid will continue now.
Another project which we would like to present you today, which is also a part of our exhibition practice, was a project of a Swiss pavilion for Pro Helvetia, that's a Swiss Art Council, which we have done with our friends Fragmentine. It's an art collective from Lausanne, and it was a very fun process of collaborating with artists. And the final goal of this project was to present a pavilion in Prague Quadriennale, which is the analog of Architectural Biennale. But basically it happens every 4 years in Prague, in Czech Republic, and it's dedicated to architecture of scenography and theatrical architecture. And we were supposed to, in arts, yes. And we were supposed to make a pavilion of Switzerland. And the topic of this, the whole event was the transformation. And we started to look, and we have presented already this project previous time for the TUVN, but now we would like more to focus not on its kind of roots or the purposes of it, but on the fact that basically we tried to reflect the Swiss nature, like in the previous picture where you have seen the beautiful nature and the bench where you passively enjoy the views, and at the same time to show the way how our pavilion interacts with the users. And here, for instance, you can see 20 Czech young artistic students which came to this exhibition, and they were all participating in the theatrical performance, in the art kind of dance slash musical performance. And the idea of the installation was in general that it's a reflection on the Swiss nature. It's also the reflection on the Swiss infrastructure, which is represented by the so-called Bauprofile, which you can see on the borders of this exhibition with an orange corners, and at the same time the interaction between the user. And the main idea of this installation was that you can interact with it either passively or actively. Passively, you climb up the chair, which allows you to overview the so-called Swiss landscape, which is this fabric which is span between the poles. And actively means that you pass between the poles, and there is a sensors which record each movement of people. And the more people come, the smaller this space becomes.
Generally, it's a sensitive floor. When someone steps on the floor, it's activated. It's the weight of the person detected, and it activates the mechanism which adjusts the landscape, this fabric on top. And the idea was that each step of each visitor directly affect the modification of the landscape.
Metaphorically, it is very close to the Swiss glaciers, which are currently, because of global warming, covered with a textile to avoid melting. The funny thing is that they still allow, meaning Swiss authorities, they still allow the access of people. So basically many people come there, they affect the nature, and yet they cover it from the sun in order to protect it. And this kind of...
But the funny thing, they cover only the place where tourists are coming. So it's not the entire glacier.
Yeah, and this controversy we wanted to underline. Here you can see a detail of this project where back you can see the screen. On front you can see a little screens which show the level of the let's say glacier millimeters of snow, and basically people are really affected. And the point is that you can either participate in this, come into this pavilion and it will become smaller, or you can go to this kind of passive chair and overview it and see that how the nature is slowly deteriorating or melting. And also the important thing was to show let's say the backstage of the technology. So all of it was recovered. And here you can see how people, like here's our collaborator Laura, who sits on this kind of Swiss chair, ski lift chair, and how she interacts in a way passively with this installation, just overlooking it. So here, why we show this project in the exhibition series is because we think that this is an interesting example of, and here we pass to the next topic. Like if Artyom was mentioning the first topic as a self-reflection, when we did some projects and we try to reflect how do we relate them in our practice, what is our own opinion on ourselves. Here's another point is the reaction and the relation to the visitors. And basically that exhibition should not be just a passive and static design element, but it should somehow react to the
and here
to people and to the visitors.
If interaction here would mediate the main point that each step of each person affects the nature, and kind of each step we are responsible for each step we make. So it was to raise responsibility. So on the other project, which was done in New York, probably Nikolai, you would present this. Nikolai?
Yes. So this project is called Foam Space, and it was a temporary and mobile installation built for 2015 Ideas City Festival in New York. And it was hosted by the New Museum of Contemporary Arts and
this
the
big
storefront.
Building in the middle.
Yeah, and the storefront for Architecture. And as you can see, part of the rod is closed, so one of the participants in the process was also a New York City Department of Transportation that had as many comments as New Museum for the art installation. So honestly, the interesting moment about this project is that although the intervention is so large, it's like almost a continuous monument on the scale of like full length of New York block. But the major focus of this work was not on the formal expression, but on the invisible processes underlying architecture. So this proposal bridges in a way together economy, logistics, public engagement in both physical and digital way.
The main reference for it as well was a blockchain. It's funny to speak about it now, but back then, almost 10 years ago, that was a really big, new, not completely understood phenomenon, and also the word.
Yeah, so what was 2015, there was in a way a lot of hype in circles of art and design where almost everyone was trying to apply blockchain in different way. So this was a a test prototype how like a spatial intervention can accommodate value and can use this value or monetize this value to create another installation, like a next iteration of it. So the whole thing involved creation of digital platform, digital currency, and these white foam blocks are in a way kind of like homage to the blockchain blocks. And actually also interesting to note that as in many of our previous projects, we work with this like mute infrastructural materials. The foam blocks are also such a large part of construction, mostly like landscape parks or building foundations. This material is always present in almost every single building, but probably the one that you never see it. So kind of this time it became the main focus of attention.
Revealed. Yeah, that's actually very interesting. And also getting back to Eva's point about that we state our temporary installations and some exhibitions as built work. To us, indeed, it's interesting to use these temporary materials, not due to the fact that they're temporary, but because we're really attracted by the aesthetics and by the physical qualities. And unfortunately, often only in temporary installations we are really allowed to use them. So that's why but the value of them, like the aesthetical and conceptual, we still appreciate on the same level as the build. Of the build projects. And speaking about interaction with visitors, the next project is exhibition in St. Petersburg in MANEGE. Leonid, would you continue?
Yes, with pleasure. Basically, we were invited to exhibit our project for St. Petersburg, which is the second biggest city in Russia. And there's a very problematic outskirt neighborhood, which is called KUDROVO, which has a huge density of population. And basically the developers, they are building this place very much. And we have done pretty critical project. And the idea of this exhibition will not go deep into this project itself, because this is not the point of this talk. But basically we have made, no, maybe you can stay in the previous slide, because I think it shows a lot. Basically,
because it's beautiful.
It's a beautiful moment of discovery, because basically it was a room in this classical building, which you have seen on the previous slide, which was completely black, and we have covered it all with wallpaper covered of the research which we did of this space. And the research was quite gloomy, although nevertheless the images look quite funny and colorful, like on the next slide. But the idea was that the people would discover the different facts about this place, the fact that how the developers try to pretend that this is super nice. And basically this girl, for instance, now there was a completely dark room where many torch lights were hanging, and there was this little images, and each image had a kind of a crop of a developer sky, how we called it, of the brochures, how they presented their own projects. And basically the whole exhibition was dedicated to this kind of selling the dream of like unrealistic kind of pseudo reality, although it was just a social housing neighborhood and one of the worst in the country, and maybe one of the worst in the world. It's really
it's really amazing phenomenon where by the colorful, bright images they show in the actual ghetto, where even before the construction of the settlement and its scale of its settlement was complete, it already turned to ghetto and was like very dangerous place. And I think now it's even more dangerous. And only lowest social levels were kind of gathering there, and it started like a real criminal. I think there was no like ever like proper law system implemented there, so it was really dangerous place, which from the very beginning was built like a ghetto, but every time represented with these very bright and nice and charming images, which were
and the idea of the exhibition was that you would first enter this exhibition and discover, you can see here this photograph, that you would discover these images, which you see on the wall. And then later you would lie down on the bed, which was installed in the middle of the space. There were also arrows, how you kind of have to access the space. And as soon as you lie down on the bed, there is a sensor which lights up the whole ceiling. And on the ceiling, there was projected our project. Here you can see it. It was a like a theoretical project of deregulation of the space. And basically, we discussed that there's no point to demolish these places or to change them. It just, there may be the deregulation and I mean, I wouldn't go more into details, but deregulation, flooding the whole territory will help it to somehow recuperate its niceness and freedom. And here you can see the guy who looks at it as a promised land rather than a completely terrible developer, how to say, and farm for people.
Yeah, we did try to emphasize this point, like to find a way not to demolish the buildings, because huge settlement and it would be kind of catastrophe to demolish, and almost impossible. But what would be the alternative way of reusing such a infrastructure, which from the first look kind of not able to serve any good, cannot create any like good facilities for human inhabitation. And the other project.
But in terms of exhibition, the main point, if we will reiterate, would be to discover certain things first in a completely dark room of the research. And second is to reveal it by kind of getting completely tired of this dark room. And imagine the same room without the bright ceiling. You just come there, it's completely dark, you're with a torch, then you kind of get tired, you lie down on this bed, and then it illuminates. So, I mean, maybe these pictures, they don't transfer the idea, but this was the main sensation of this exhibition.
The other project which we want to show happened to be in Moscow. We did in collaboration with the Novo Bureau and Katya Zafyalova. And here the curator's approach was to create the most, it called inhuman hospitality. I somehow cannot see the name. And the idea was to create.
You can just continue.
The idea was to create the most generic space, and she took as a reference like 3-star hotel, which you can find in any city around the world, where all of them look the same. Try to look cozy, but at the same time very not able, all of them not able to be cozy. So we also try to, even for representation of the graphics of this exhibition, to use the more generic tool. Like here you can see it's just SketchUp, like the most primitive render setting in SketchUp. Where out of also these automatic blocks, we created furniture and even placed people, and try to find certain intrigue in this very primitive graphical language. That's how the project looked like. It's kind of blurs the borders in between the exhibition objects and we kind of try to confuse the visitors. What is it? Is it already exhibition object, or is it just museum facilities? So it was all populated by
Or is it just a shitty design of the
Yeah, it's just shit design of the museum. So that was all what you can see, the floor finish, the furniture, cooler, and even the flower in the trash bin. It was purposely selected for this exhibition. And we created rooms in this museum. And it's interesting because you can see the girl who's laying on the bed, like it would be a hotel room. And the art piece itself, it's actually hanging on top of her. And this kind of provocation by placing people in familiar places, in unfamiliar situations, or even like familiar situations, but which conflicting with the other environment of the place, actually created quite an interesting combination. So sometimes people, like this guy on the right side, he's not really sure if he's allowed to enter this room because it's kind of already occupied by other visitors. At the same time, in this exhibition, there was no meaning of like, it wasn't possible to really occupy because each room was accessible to everyone. And this conflict with this kind of game with the perception of different spaces, of different social cliche, create quite an interesting effect. And some people, they really took this challenge and start to take off their shoes, jump on the bed. Some played very formal, but that create quite an interesting effect. And we tested it, this exhibition, almost like a public space in the city. So that's why it's also kind of continuation of our thoughts about public spaces and architectural thoughts. How should we approach the common areas which are accessible to everyone? How to provoke people to feel they're different, to behave they're different, and to perceive other peoples, to perceive other players of this space differently. And in continuation of this topic, the other exhibition which we want to show, called Forum Basel in Swiss Architecture Museum. We were invited there by Andreas Ruby, by the director of the museum. And over there, we tried to convert the entire exhibition, which called Forum Basel, into one public space. So the whole space of the museum supposed to become public space. And we created a free entry, free Wi-Fi, and tried to incorporate in the institutions of the museum, in the space of the museum, actions of the real open public space, and see how people would perceive and react on this. Like one of the ideas was to make accessible a rooftop of the museum, which you can see right at the moment when you can enter it, but you're not allowed actually to enter there. And the last moment, right before the opening, I think fire officer or someone, they didn't allow us to make this roof accessible for public. So in the end, little barrier was stopped. But this promise of potential of the public space at the rooftop, we still decided to keep by placing the chairs and tables, and kind of, which is supposed to be very tempting for people, tempting but impossible. And this conversation, this transformation of the museum space into public space, we continue by inviting Balkan band, and these Balkan musicians, which usually plays next to Central Station, were playing at the opening, and placing huge ping pong table. It's the same ping pong table, but just scaled several times. So 10 people could play at the same moment. This placement of familiar objects, but of unfamiliar dimensions, in unfamiliar or familiar, but dedicated to the other function environment, sometimes really drove people crazy. Like here, this lady on the foreground, it's funny, Christian's our good friend, but generally the whole flow of the exhibition was very interesting, how people found out how they can behave differently in the very institutional space. At the same time, we organized several workshops, and one of them, by then we were teaching as well in Bangkok, and it's some of the students of our university which came here for the workshop. The other point was to organize co-working, and since the museum was open during normal working hours and the entrance there was for free, it was allowed to come there, use Wi-Fi, and just work right in the middle of the museum and become part of this exhibition. So visitors who were staying there, working there, would become one of the objects of the exhibitions. And we were very pleased with this idea, because by then we were living in Bangkok, and we were just for several months in Basel, so we had no any proper place to work, and museum was a good compensation of these facilities. And the other object which we place, it's this kind of plinth, this platform made out of paper, out of old newspapers. And in Basel, there is a so-called paper day or carton day. Once a month, everyone allowed to place their carton in the evening outside of the houses, and then over the night it's picked up by the cleaner service. So it's a very interesting kind of festival when during only one day a month the whole city become covered by these piles of paper, and we collected this and placed in the middle of museum. And it was well interesting because the reaction of people, someone treat them as an art piece which you're not allowed to touch. Some people laid on there, sit on there, and this again shift of the perception, or kind of challenging the way we try to challenge people to involve them in the museum space and blur the border in between visitor and participant, visitor and the object is very important to us, but not only in museums, in exhibitions, but as well as in public space. And the other very important...
May I add one thing that in the previous image Artyom was showing? This is one of the chief curators of Art Basel of Europe, called Nikolai Palaszczuk, and also our very good friend and our client. So we really like this picture because the guy is completely, it looks like almost photoshopped his body on this piece of paper, but he really liked it, and for us it was very important that
yeah, it was also very interesting how different people kind of treated art, if I would call it this way. The normal visitors, they kind of, everything what they see in the museum, they was, oh, you're not supposed to touch it. And curators like, what is it here? Let me jump, let me lay. And they were like, it was a very different attitude, which you can could immediately detect how familiar people with art. And the other object, which was very important to us in this exhibition, since this exhibition was dedicated to public space and we made certain research about public space, we also making assumptions, or we made the research about the most popular and the beloved public spaces in Basel, but we placed also the map where everyone could vote during the exhibition for their best public space by pinning a person at the place which they like together. And then it was very interesting to see how our research was corresponded to the research which was made during the exhibition. And that's a very important point to us, that museum is not archive. It's not the place where we're just exhibiting something. It should be a laboratory. It's here by this tool, by this map, we will still keep gathering information which was lacking or not very complete during, or just it was our assumptions. It was very interesting to prove it by the vote of the people, and that's very important to treat museum more like a laboratory, is a tool to find the way in these new territories rather than looking only back and making retroactive exhibitions.
And here we come to the next point in our reflection about the exhibition, that not only the exhibition can be the moment when we reflect on ourselves, not only they can be the places where we interact with the visitors, but they can be also, like Artyom just said, the laboratories where we create new ideas. And that was exactly the point of the exhibition in Basel, which was just presented by Artyom, but from, let's say, the standpoint of set design. And now I would just share with you a couple of ideas which were created during this exhibition for City of Basel, when we decided to propose a new floating public space, a new floating gallery, which would be basically continuation of Basel typical ferry, but also become an art gallery. Or, for instance, an underground passage which would occupy the medieval river, and it will become a new public space for the citizens of Basel in the center of the city. And again, all these ideas, they were all developed. We had them a bit in advance, but they were all developed during this exhibition of Forum Basel, which we were showing you before. or for instance, a project of heating up the traditional medieval fountains in the center of the city to make them a spa, like in this image and in this project, which was called Terme Urbano, and also proposing new regimes of use for the existing and very familiar objects. And interestingly enough, 3 years have passed since this exhibition. So the exhibition which Artyom was presenting to you, and I was presenting just now the project, it happened 3 years ago. 3 years later happened an exhibition which was called Forum Basel 2050, which looks 30 years from now. And it was already not just our, let's say, wet dreams to how to transform the public space of Basel city, but it was already a serious exhibition which was organized by the canton of Basel, and they invited us again to participate in the same exhibition, but already with a more serious thing. And we have proposed several concepts, several kind of urban principles. For instance, this one.
Some of them, they were completely continued from the Forum Basel, which we did 3 years ago. Some of them were kind of new. That was like the most interesting.
Yeah, so we were very happy to see the continuation of our purely speculative and self-initiated projects. For instance, this one was a general principle for the city, for the industrial neighborhood, to create a curated public ground floor space, which means that you keep and it's very connected, and we even use this image for our hardware software studio in TU Vienna. It was a project which had to do with the fact that you keep the original buildings, you keep the spirit of the industrial neighborhood, yet you give the ground floors to the people, you curate it in different ways, and you make out public space of it. Or, next slide, please. Or for instance, combining the whole city, the flat rooftops which exist already, via a network of green spaces, which create a completely second, let's say, layer of a green network above the city. Or, for instance, the next slide, this image, the orange line, the border between the industrial and corporate campuses of the city on the left and the city itself. And they propose to, let's say, demolish the border and to allow the people to go and to leave the so-called kind of closed campuses. And this was, maybe it looks like a naive proposal, but it's actually a very important thing, that the same territory, which can be fenced off and never work after, let's say, 7 p.m. when the corporate or industrial or like any working environment, office place is not working. Basically, these all territories are lost for the cities. And it's a much bigger proposal because it proposes to give all these spaces to the use of the city, to propose several usages for the same public space. Next one, please. This is the same image as the previous one. The network of the green spaces above the city.
Here it's very important that it's not about green roofs. There's nothing new in the green roofs, but treatment of all the green roofs as one system, which by connecting by small bridges really creates a network as one system of circulation, one connected system of public spaces. And in these terms, every small garden of 10, 15 meters, square meters included in the system become really diverse, beautiful, and very efficient public space, which hovering on top of the city, on top of the roads, and connects all the blocks around the city and become alternative system of circulation and compensation of lack of greenery in the city.
Yeah, or for instance, this image, which can look pretty generic, but basically this was a proposal of adding different, in the dense European small historical city, to add a different layer of usage for public space. So this was a big transport infrastructural intersection, and we proposed that during certain times, for instance, during weekends, during the post-rush hour times, it becomes the space for markets, for public space, for shops of greenery, for different diverse pavilions with food and etc.
And it's very interesting. It's movable, so it's really like you can see all the greenery and the commercial functions. They're placed on a little kind of platform on the wheels, which takes the tracks of the trams, and really can modify this crossing and this city squares really within several minutes in completely another environment.
Next slide, please, Artyom. Yeah, or another, so basically it was a series of principles which could be applied in general to the city, and this was the principles of pedestrian and public passages which go over the so-called, let's say, lost places of the railway stations. And basically our point was that these spaces are not lost. They are used as infrastructure, but they can also be used completely as a connections for pedestrian, bicycle connections, for linear public spaces, for greenery and so on. Next one. Or for instance, this was a rather provocative image in the local context because it kind of mocks a bit the architecture of Herzog de Meuron, Roche Towers. But basically the idea was that not only the ground floor, which I have spoken 3 slides before, and you can see it on the bottom of the image, should become completely shared public space, but also the top floors of each skyscraper should be given to the city and should be given to the public use. And we believe that no matter whether the owner of the building is private or not, this would really activate and give a completely new layer to the city, and it would give a completely new kick to the public space. So here the most, let's say, luxurious penthouses, they're given to the public, and that's why they're shown that they are illuminated.
It's as well related with the point of regimes of uses, as what we spoke about territory, that all these areas could be also managed in time and then given to the city, like over the weekend or over the evenings, like on these images, that such important places in the city shouldn't belong only to one company or one person.
Yeah, and there were some other concepts, like for instance, introducing the water features and the landscape features inside the traditional interior courtyards of the city, like Basel, or deregulating certain areas, like this image of where the 3 countries meet, like Switzerland, France, and Germany. And there we propose to use the existing infrastructure and to create the so-called deregulated triangle, where the more, let's say, there is uplifted regimes of economical and legal regimes are functioning. Therefore, this is a kind of although this is the outskirts of all the cities around it, but it can become a center of like a free economy.
Yeah, and I think the most important about this this chapter, that how ideas which introduced in the museum as like speculative projects could then affect the real life of the city by because the project which we showed now, they now integrated in the strategy of the development of the city, and it's really, if everything goes good, some of them in bigger or smaller scale would be integrated in the city space of Basel. Nikolai?
So this project was about 1 year ago, fall 2019. We were invited to participate in Architectural Biennale in São Paulo. And the theme of the Biennale was everyday, and it kind of explored the questions and concerns about like environment, sustainability, but based on a very like small scale of everyday objects and events. So we will propose to travel there actually to give a short workshop and a lecture, although thinking internally about the whole idea of everyday and environments, we decided that actually it goes against the theme of Biennale, because traveling for like really small period of time so far doesn't actually make that much sense. So our response for a call and our like conceptual statement was to send this large-scale art piece, which is actually a carpet that is more than a meter by meter size, that like represents the like a microcosm of the modern world, all the continents, all the countries, all the like satellites, all the little things that somehow summarize this picture of like micro living and working with the environment. And it's like represented in a very like slightly naive graphical manner. It has a lot of like cute, cool, intricate details, which kind of nice talking about such an important theme with such a like naive gesture in a way. And what was also interesting to us that why we picked the carpet as an object is because historically, like in many cultures and many folklores, carpets always carried some sort of like sacred significance or symbolical message. For example, like carpets with floral patterns or carpets that represented gardens are like always described an ideal micro model of the world that you want to live in. And also like in Russian culture, a carpet on the wall, especially like during Soviet Union times where everyone lived in this panel housing, all the buildings the same. This was such a sort of like cozy little decorative artifact that helped people a lot to make the home feel like personal and traditional.
Yeah, it's a very petit bourgeois object, which at the same time, when it reflects something critical about the state where we live in, we find this is a quite a controversial topic, and both of them are very quotidian. And the idea of todo dia in Portuguese Brazilian language, of the everyday, both the everyday of your petit bourgeois carpet, and at the same time everyday of you polluting the plant, was quite we found it quite a nice kind of ironic.
Yeah, that was interesting, like answer on this constant travel all around the world for some small events. Well, we were all sure that Biennale will happen in May 2020 in Venice, the main Biennale, but it happened differently. And that was our project for the Russian pavilion for this year, for the Biennale.
So yes, it's actually quite interesting to think about in like some time frame. We worked on the proposal for Biennale like early 2020, like early January. And just to give some context, the Russian pavilion that you can see on the picture was built like in 1914 by Alexei Shushev, sorry, and now it's actually in need of renovation. So the curators of the pavilion launched a competition for both renovation of the building, but also like rethinking of the institution itself and how it works, how it operates, what happens inside. And can you go next one? And our proposal was to like create like a live project, a sort of like open office within the pavilion where people, different teams, different architects would work and collaborate within the pavilion, like working on the project of the renovation while discussing other matters. So this is the backside of the pavilion, which connects to the waterfront of Giardini. And probably the most important part was like not even thinking of aesthetics, but thinking of modes of operation within time of the pavilion. So traditionally, the pavilions are opened during the time of Biennale. You can access them from the territory of the Biennale, and otherwise they're closed. So like
They again, like corporations, they completely, like all the museums and the whole theater of Biennale, excluded of public space of Venice. It's open only for the events, and then it's closed. And also all over the night when the need in public space is not not smaller, it's somehow closed and not accessible to public, which we decide to challenge by our approach.
So in a way, we're adding this ramp on the back facade of pavilion, which kind of becomes its second front entrance. So you can, during the Biennale, like during daytime, you don't need to pay the ticket. You can go from outside into the pavilion. You can stay, participate in work, like see the exhibition. And then if you want to go through the pavilion to Biennale, you have to go through the checkpoint.
Yeah,
But
that's
like,
important here to emphasize that Russian Pavilion stays right at the edge of the Giardini, so it has direct access from the canal, as you can see. So we propose to exclude Russian Pavilion from the theater of Giardini, from the theater of Biennale, and make it kind of deterritorial. And then so the entrance there is for free, and indeed you paying the ticket, you're showing the ticket by the when you leave in the pavilion into theater of Biennale.
And the same for the nighttime. At night, when the whole Biennale is closed, the pavilion actually it's only one like object that is open, and it like expands the time presence of the Biennale. There are parties, there are lectures, there is a bar. People can come at any time. People maybe can rent a room on Airbnb and stay there. So it's like this, like little oasis at night within the Biennale.
Which compensates lack of public activities of the night.
This is the other side of the building. This is actually what is called the front of the pavilion, and this little porch and the door you can see is where you traditionally enter. So the focus of the image is actually the screen you can see on the front of the building, and like as we already like described a lot, our offices, like we communicate digitally. We all live in different places and all sorts of platforms, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's like Telegram, we communicate only digitally. We propose same sort of very similar mode of operation for the pavilion, where you showcase everything live that happens. It's basically a big chat or like series of chats where all sorts of like participating teams, consultants, people from Venice, and actually almost anyone who wants to participate like digitally, like can post their message and collaborate. And technically you don't even need to go to Venice to do that. You can do it from home.
Yeah, we kind of reflected this absurdity when digital every time in front of real nowadays. And then, for example, even though you have been present in Biennale, then in the evening you sit and you check latest news to see which pavilions are interesting, which not, which you haven't managed to visit. So even though you are present there, you anyway visiting pavilions often online.
And it's actually kind of interesting to notice that that was like almost like 12 months ago, a conceptual concept for pavilion in Venice. Actually now in pandemic time, that's like exactly way how we work. Like, yeah, so this space, if you go a little bit back, just one back. So that's, the pavilion has 2 floors. The second one is this, it's a major floor. This is the space of the open office. It's basically a field of objects, tables, chairs, little desks that you can freely move around. And in the center of the space, there is this central object, which is kind of like a transformer. There is like a kitchen underneath it. There is like a lecture space within it. There is a stair that leads you down, sort of like a central node of the pavilion, where everything that happens around kind of like mixes and works together. And
yeah, we try to create
yeah.
like absolute white box and install in the middle one kind of functional core, and depending on which side of the function of this functional core is activated, the whole space could change. It can become canteen, it can become exhibition space, a place for presentations. So here we are again speaking about regimes of use, how the same space could be used completely differently through the time of one day and one night.
And yeah, that's the night. So basically, thinking about couple slides before, when during the night you could enter from the waterfront, you like get into this like colorful or like activated space at night. And the previous slide was like for the Biennale operation. And this floor is actually ground floor, which is underneath the previous one. Um, Interestingly enough, the whole process of participation in this competition was so all about collaboration, all about like involving everyone, being open, being transparent, being digital. So one of our proposals was to like actually not to select a winning team, but just invite everyone who participated in the competition to work together in one place and collaborate. And this space is sort of like archive of ideas where everything that is generated during the Biennale is like stored and displayed, and different teams can do their own exhibits and like work on their own things, like without even a regard to like a general schedule.
But Russian pavilion wasn't the only one which wasn't open this May. We as well supposed to participate in Polish pavilion, and curators of Polish pavilion called the topic Trouble in Paradise, somehow foreseeing what probably will happen already in January. And we're supposed to participate in this Trouble in Paradise by creating a project for the landscape. So it's supposed to be a countryside and operating with the scale of the settlement. And kind of summarizing all the points which we were saying before, that in our conceptual projects or in our speculative projects, it's important to us to work with the regimes of use, efficiency of use of the land, to kind of minimalize, to make, to achieve maximum with minimal means. We try to, with this project, make an alternative for the countryside, which now experience uncontrolled growth due as well to lack of regulations of the countryside. And we want to limit, in order to avoid countryside being completely built by in coming years, we want to propose this type of regulations that we build only in countryside, only where it's already exists some built objects or infrastructure. And of course, roads, which exist in countryside, is the most visible and the most present element. So we propose to limitate all the new construction on top of the roads and make kind of these elevated lines which connect cities from one side, but from another side, hosting all the activities which are supposed to happen in the countryside, like living, working, and of course, agricultural production. And this concept offers for us quite an interesting concept, quite an interesting spatial solution, where at the ground level, we have circulation for the transport. We agreed that, yes, I have to say, this project is about future, is about some near or not so near future. So we assume that in the future, we still would have traffic circulation as a main system of circulation, probably on two wheels, but we assume it's as well not so polluted and not so loud. So it could normally coexist, like big highways or big arteries of transportation, of circulation, could normally coexist with the levels of on which we place housing and agricultural functions. So right on top of the circulation, we can see level with housing, which is very comfortable, because by your private car or public car, you can stop right in front of your house and have a direct access to your house one floor above. From this, from your own house, you have every time direct view to the nature, which is not obstructed to by any other construction or any other, you don't see any trace of other human activity, only beautiful historical monuments like Polish castles, green trees, and two horses. And on top, we can see the public floor, which combines both agricultural activity, but as well function of other types of production. And we believe that in what's already exists in the near future, we need less and less human activity to operate agriculture. So humans just show up a couple of times a day, or probably even a couple of times a week, to control that everything all right and to pick the food. While the rest of the time, agriculture already operated by machines and robots. And at the same time, we would love to take the advantage of this microclimate created within the greenhouse and taking more benefits out of this artificial comfortable microclimate. We propose to integrate different public functions like co-working, canteens, also kindergartens, place for gathering. So for example, like in this snowy winter day, if you would look at the left part of the image, you will see white hills with some dark trees. So they indicates that behind this glass shell, we can actually experience quite cold temperature. And while within this glass shell, we have perfect green environment in which people can integrate different public activities and human needs. And summarizing this presentation, we would like to, with two projects which both represents self-reflection and production of new ideas, two of the most important functions to us of exhibition, because somehow exhibition, it's not just the way to us to present what we did. We every time try to think a bit further and try to treat it indeed as a project, as the same conceptual challenge as any other normal project which we do in. And one project which we did for Milan Design Week, which was exhibited in Alcova, it was organized by QUADRIENNALE and called Tools of Architecture, or Micro Tools. And over there, we decided to exhibit all our pavilions, all our temporary buildings, because we realized that, or we tracked that, looking back at our projects, at our work, that we use these pavilions to test some some ideas and tricks and matters and concepts, which often we then try to introduce in a bigger scale projects and promote to the permanent buildings and bigger scale interventions. And the reference to this like collection of these objects was a box with the butterflies pinned and collected and kind of accurately structured. And that's exactly what we try to do with the collection of our temporary objects, which organized in this box.
The point is that the word of pavilion and the word of the Latin butterfly comes from the same word, papilio. So basically, the word pavilion is directly linked with the word butterfly, and it's because it is very very temporary, and it can, like a butterfly who has a lifespan of sometimes 2 days. The same happens with ephemeral structures of pavilion, and basically that's why we designed to pin down our projects and to exhibit them in this way. But at the same time,
thank you, Professor Slanimsky.
Yes, at the same time, that can be very, let's say, dry, or at the same time kind of fixed and static way of reflecting on our work, and therefore,
yeah, and the other project which we exhibit as well in Biennale, or in Biennale in Milano, but 1 year later, the pavilion project was 2019, and the one I'm speaking about now is 2020. We presented it 15th of February, just a couple of weeks before the massive transformation of the world which we used to live in. And in this project, we were invited by Joseph Griemer to participate in exhibition in the State of Art of Architecture, and where we're supposed to present one of our projects, which is the most interesting to us. So here we decided not to present any of the build projects, but take this advantage to analyze something, to create something new. And for this exhibition, we finally found time to complete the book, which we were working since a long time, which called Contemporary Architecture, where, as you see in the word contemporary, we cross con and left temporary. In architecture, we cross archi, author, and left texture, structure, kind of trying to understand what contemporary architecture could learn from temporary structures. So that's exactly what we try to learn in our practice. Looking at the main source of inspiration for us is usually temporary, technical, infrastructural, engineering objects and structures, and we classify them, try to find the logic of them. And then this book was kind of a manifesto of this never written manifesto of temporary kind of anonymous structures, anonymous not due to the absence of the author, but because I believe the author was never placed architectural means in front of the technical means. So we try to understand what could these structures manifest to architecture. And we presented this book in the overscaled version, printed on this banner net, which usually used for advertisement banners or to cover the fences of the construction site. And yes, and that was the example of the book, of the project, where we try through the exhibition to use the exhibition as a tool to understand something and to learn something for our real practice, which we now try to integrate in our real projects. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much.
We can now pass to
Yeah,
if
so
there is
yes.
any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I just start and then I give the word to the students that hopefully like take part of the discussion. Thank you very much for this like insight in the exhibition project that really happened within museums or institutions that like called these projects also exhibition project. I'm very happy that you mentioned also the last project, which I saw already in the lecture before, this contemporary architecture reflection on your temporary structures. And this I found super interesting in the last lecture, how you test, and you mentioned it also now at the end, that you treat each project, if it is an exhibition project or a temporary structure or also a project on a bigger scale, in the same way, that you really try to find a convincing concept for it, and that you use especially these temporary structures to test, to experiment with materials or to challenge certain conditions of the city, that you then use also for other projects in a bigger scale. So it would be my first question, if these temporary structures are not the same way exhibitions as the projects that you did in the museum themselves, because they digest certain things, they reflect certain things, they provoke maybe also, they do all the same things that you say your exhibition projects are doing. So maybe you could explain to the students a little bit more how you work with these temporary structures and what this means to your practice.
There's a famous Russian saying which called, "There's nothing more permanent than temporary." We often say it in this context. That means, especially due to Russian kind of mentality, as soon as you place something temporary, since it's fine and it's not confronting like someone really, it could stay for ages there, even though it was just placed for a couple of days. So I think nowadays it's very different to draw this line. What makes because also like many permanent things, they're not so permanent anymore. That's what we spoke in our, for example, design brief for our studio. Many new buildings, they get demolished in 10, 15, not so many, but there are cases when buildings get demolished significantly earlier than their physical age, kind of force them to get demolished. So they just mentally become too old. So in these terms, temporary structures, they could be the way to mediate the architectural message much more appropriate way, because even though since our society built this way that we every time renew the facilities, renew the buildings, renew the environment, and start to renovate facades as soon as they complete. What we also speak with students that facade nowadays, it's almost plays the role of a business suit or like clothes, which should represent certain certain attitude, so like which should represent a client or like the owner. It doesn't matter if it's a private person or big corporation, but also these persons, private persons or corporations often changing facade, changing the appearance due to latest trend in architecture, in general like environmental design, and should every time mediate something the same way like this mediates. Here we more asking generally about what should be permanent, or does it exist in our world now the meaning permanent? Things becomes more and more temporary, just built out of more resistant materials, and that's one of the I don't know. Here for us is really then difficult to divide, to draw the line in between temporary and permanent. Since to us the design is the concentration of conceptual thoughts and also the effort to do it, often temporary structures are not easier or sometimes more concentrated conceptually, even more interesting than permanent. So in these terms, we don't really separate our work on. We don't have this division of like this permanent thinking way of thinking, this temporary way of thinking.
This is what I stated also in the beginning. There are now no clear borders between the formats that you deal with. And how you said now, maybe these temporary structures can mediate much more aspects of architecture than a drawing in a museum. They can also like speak to much more people in the city and in the street. And therefore, I find it quite interesting to see them also as exhibition format to speak for architecture, about architecture that you really use. And this is quite interesting to me, that you provoke also something, what you do in this exhibition format within the museum, also with these temporary structures in the cities. And I really like this, this book that you did, where you reflect on what you're doing with these temporary structures. So therefore, this for me was also the starting point, which now came at the end, also to, for me, an exhibition format for architecture. Yeah. But maybe, I mean, I have a lot of more questions, but I would like to open now the discussion to everybody else. I don't know if Tina wants to add at the beginning something, or if we should invite the students before. I don't know. Just join the discussion.
Exactly. Maybe I can ask certain questions. Thank you first for your great presentation, everyone, Nikolai, Artem, and Leonid. It was great to see you try to challenge the way how to somehow explain the story or the importance of all your temporary dressings. I somehow saw the work, which was truly remarkable and presented with this kind of strength and ambition, but also naivety, but in a good way, because you try in every project to somehow challenge the rules and the institutions themselves. And what I was even more fascinated that we have tried to challenge the Biennale, Venice Biennale, the rules of Venice Biennale, so I know how hard it is. But you were trying to challenge also on museum institution within Switzerland, you know, in Basel, where you have thousands of rules, not only the time, I think time is one that you are referring to all the time, the timetables of any institutions. Of course, you are challenging also the fire regulations, but also the currency and the roles of these institutions and the participants in those museums, because today it's a different lecture. So I was extremely inspired by your determinacy that you change the role of the curator. So you make you open up the museums, especially this one in Swiss, in Basel, that you opened up the museum, which is regarded still with the quite huge percentage of general population as a sacred space, no? I mean, we've seen, and you are really radically opening with certain tricks. And I think this is, you know, I haven't lived in Switzerland, but I felt very different culture there of, you know, not so, let's say, impromptu or open to these things. And I think the achievements that you have done in this, through this kind of public exhibition, it's quite extraordinary. So this extensive publicness. So I would like you to somehow even more comment on this kind of changing the way we perceive institutions and changing this extra hidden public space that you somehow try to reveal, not only within the museums, but also with this kind of proposals of seeing a future park on top of the rooftops. So kind of this urge for public spaces where we don't know that they exist, but they should be free or more open to a larger society. Could you reflect on that, maybe?
Maybe I can, I don't know, maybe Artyom and Nikolai also have something to say. I can tell you what I find very interesting in this type of work is the collaborative moment. So I would say it was not only our idea, it was also our collaborators, Andreas Ruby, who was, and Stefanie Savia, who were the curators of the exhibition, and also the Chilean office, Plan Común, who are particularly interested in, like us, in public space and opening it up into a bigger audience. So it was really like this idea of challenging the Swiss museum, as you, Tina, have said it, in this kind of beautiful yet cliche kind of something very beautiful, almost like jewelry-like exhibition, but at the same time something very closed-minded, something perfectly hermetic, and something completely not allowing to participate. And that was the, let's say, the kickstart moment of this exhibition, when we decided to challenge, like for instance, it's a very funny thing, there was this, even in this presentation, it was quite a sad image of this rooftop filled with the chairs. And to be honest, like it would be nice even to discuss it, but there was a huge process of trying to make this thing happen, because basically the chairs, they were exceeding the...
Making this not happen in the end.
They were too heavy for the concrete roof of a museum, and everyone was against it, and there was so much discussion. But I think the whole idea, I mean, it doesn't look so fancy on the image, just like 10 chairs on the rooftop of a museum, but it was a very big point for us, and that's why we presented in this image. And I'm sure, like, if Andreas Ruby was here, he would also agree with us that this kind of whole point of opening this roof was more important than even like the moment which you would spend there. So it was a really interesting moment of this struggling with the regulations and in such a
but I think here is as well context. It's important like that it was really opening up the mind, because in some institutions, in some cities, quite conservative. And for example, when we arrived to Basel, one of the things which I was kind of shocked at the streets, there was almost no tables and open terraces, like really few in the entire city, even though the city is like really neighboring France, you can walk through the border to the France. But in Basel itself, the public space is quite rigid, and there's no place to go and sit outside and just have coffee at the table. There were like few kind of more beer garden style places, but this casual thing that along the street you have table and a chair, it didn't exist. I don't know why. And it's very interesting. So in these terms, it's kind of was also kind of project to protest against it and show how much more advantage can we take out of open space, out of public space, what are the potentials there. And as well, it's interesting, like one of the good things about COVID, this summer, we were together with Leonid in Basel, right after lockdown in the beginning of June. That was exactly the moment when we met to make the lecture for like the one we did in the summer. So we were afraid to do it from different points. So we went to Basel, and because of COVID, regulations for all the cafes was very strict in terms of amount of people inside, and then all the streets was completely deformed. It was filled with chairs, tables, and people were sitting, celebrating the beautiful weather, beautiful public space, and finally taking advantage of it. And I was kind of a bit sarcastically saying that such a massive thing like pandemic should happen, that people would start to appreciate better the facilities they have and take use of them. And probably to finish this question and kind of link it to the previous one, with the book we discussed before about temporary structures, I think one of the most kind of like one of the conclusions we made there, it was about what we can learn from temporary structures, that usually temporary structures, they have very particular and very exciting aesthetics, but this aesthetics created not for the point of beauty, it's created to solve certain problem, because there was a certain typological challenge which this temporary structure tried to solve, to spend certain, to be like fast assemblable, to be very light, to, I don't know, to, yeah, whatever. So the conclusion was it's important to create new typologies, and then this new typologies requires new aesthetics. And in these terms, we kind of looking not for the working not on the abstract aesthetical search, but we more just by solving well-formulated typological problem, we urged to create new aesthetics, new types of architecture. And in these terms, probably this exhibition was exactly this new typology of the exhibition, which we also try to work with.
I also want to add that actually what I think is important in terms of temporary structures, just by itself, by its nature, it allows you to kind of switch different formats in a very much smoother, much easier way. You can use temporary architecture to do exhibits, whether it's an object of the exhibition, like more of an art piece, like Art Basel, whether it's like organization of space, whether it's actually some functional object outside in the city, not following the museum rules and things like that. So it's sort of something that kind of like helps us to like test maybe same things, but in a different settings, but within the same amount of like kind of like tools that we have. That is part of like interdisciplinarity, I think is interesting. And also in general, I think, I mean, it's pretty common that people say architecture has this like slow response to reality. Like building takes a couple of years to get done. When it's done, we almost declare that it is outdated in many cases.
Often a couple of decades.
Yeah, yeah, it can be like a couple of years, a couple of decades, but like within this reactive world now with COVID, with quarantine, like the rules of design and like changing like every half year, and like things that were started like 3 years ago. Like for example, if you go to like office buildings or buildings with like workplaces, like they will be done and they will be already outdated in a way, many of them. So while you work within temporary architecture, like it's so fast to build, you can be more like kind of like on the same page with the pace of the world.
And you can also challenge in a different way the regimes that you always like talk about, because if you build something real, you cannot, you have to be within these regimes, within these rules. And this you can, yeah, you can build a statement that it's really challenging these rules. And this I find quite interesting, which you are doing with your projects. And as you also explained last time, for example, you showed this picture of this huge wall along, I don't remember where, along a street.
In the center of Moscow.
Yeah, exactly. Which you could never build as a building or something that has to go through the regulations that you, but as a temporary structure, nobody's asking. And therefore, I think this tool that you use is a quite potential tool, like to express and state and claim things within architecture. Therefore, I would like state here that this is an exhibition tool, or this is the exhibition of architecture that's quite powerful, and they are using this as one of many formats with which you're dealing. I want to, if there is another question now, I would like to add something more, which I also talked about in the beginning, that you spoke about the role of yourself, of architects, that you tried to reflect this also always after these different collaborations, different formats that you dealt with. So I would like to ask you again to reflect on this. How do you see yourself, or how would you define your role? I said at the beginning that in the last lecture you talked about like the architect is a curator, chief curator. Maybe you could, also reflect on this, how you would, describe your field of action or your role as architect within the society.
Well, we have this kind of strange statement, which we were surprised to came to, and we're not very happy about it, but we thought that we have to say it, that nowadays, I think architects really have to try not to build, even though it's a dream of any, or most of the architects, or at least of myself, to build something. But I have to admit that environmental wise, it's very bad, and we have to look for the possibilities to avoid any construction. And if we can solve it with the minimal means, it's even better. If we can just shift a chair, it's good. If we need to paint the wall, okay, but they have to demolish the wall, then it's worse. I have demolished the entire building, it's kind of fail. So that's as well like one of the topics which we focus in our studio now into Wien. It's how to design the buildings which from the very beginning assumed to be rebuilt in near future, and rebuilt according to the program which we have no clue about. Like now we're all speaking about in COVID, people have to spend more time outside. But I don't know, probably in future something will come that, I don't know, ozone hole in the troposphere will become so big that dangerous UV lights will go to the earth and we have to hide us from the sun. It will be dangerous to be outside. So we never know these challenges which we will face. So from the very beginning, we have to look at everything what we built from the point of view soon it should be completely changed, and design it from the way it would be as easy as possible to change.
And to add to that, when we say like architect as a curator, it's mostly talking about the position of the architect within the industry. Like now, traditionally, architect is somewhere in the middle where there's a developer on one side and investor and construction industry on the other side. Architect being like tucked in the middle, pressed by both parties. And being architect as a curator is more like architects being able to initiate their own project, architects being able to be as spokespeople for their industry, architects being able to engage better public realm and kind of being more of a central node and trying to like educate other people and like being both part of professional environments and like teaching environment as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting notion what you just mentioned. It feels like for you all being more a curator and a self-initiator of the project, it's also more liberating position, no? And trying to fight the problems or the power of the developers and the construction industry, but not only that, also the power of all the legislation and all the engineers, because the role of architects in a normal or larger project is actually diminishing and kind of smaller and smaller each day. So my question, which I think is extremely important and relevant in your projects, is that you're really self-initiating all these all these projects in itself, and that you are critical, as Arte mentioned before, that in today's climate condition of our planet, we should be really thinking if we need to build. We had a similar discussion at the end of your first lecture here, that my kind of fear in the architecture profession is that if the thinkers like you would avoid to become a professional architect, you know, trying to really contribute, but you are within also that strategy of BASEL and other projects that we discussed otherwise, and would leave that to kind of average architects, which would actually be service industry, as we know from US mostly, and other environments, not so much European, we would be confronted with even more poorly built architecture around us, you know, because now we see the average quality of architecture among which we walk every day was actually is reflecting hundreds of years of legislation and the importance of treating the architects in certain environments as someone who can contribute to a brighter future, not only to somehow necessitate the needs of the developers or either being public or private. And I think this discussion, it's really important to somehow continue and to participate and to redefine our role. From what I thought, it's extremely interesting that you were, you kind of jumped, you know, from trying to provoke the public, let's say this Swiss museum, in terms of this kind of potential new bright publicness, new brave world of public everywhere. And then for that reason, you were invited to co-create the strategy of the city for 2050, which is something that urban planners or completely different institution otherwise would be rethinking. Of course, it can be treated like an art or kind of very, again, ephemeral or conceptual question. But if any of those ideas that you mentioned might become a reality, that would be something in a long-lasting way to somehow really contribute to the, not only for a couple of minutes or hours or days, but for a radical new change in part of the city of Basel. So how do you see that switch from becoming, let's say, radical conceptual provocateurs of the institutions of the museums to become like the strategies of the urban planning in the city of Basel?
But to be honest, this already, I don't think we have presented it very clearly. In a way, to answer the last part of your question, this already has happened. The thing is that, I mean, it's not something conceptually thought through, but basically after 3 years after this first exhibition, we were contacted by the Bauplanungsamt of Canton Basel-Stadt, and they invited us to participate in the real project. And let's say 50% of the images which we presented were already the real, let's say, visualizations of their future principles. And this was very, I mean, on one side it was very important for us, and on the other side we just thought like how can we move it further to make it real projects and not just urban principles, because urban principles sound still very vague.
How to make them a bit more radical, because for example there was urban principle of green roofs, but then we look at them, okay, that's not radical enough, but if we will add some small elements that the connectors for this like green public roofs, then it works as one big system, and which is big change, big shift in comparison to just small publicly accessible rooftops. So it's more, I mean, we never really thought about this switch because it's kind of happens very naturally. No one came to us say, you guys now will be like city changers. Before that, you've been just, I don't know, students. So it just...
So it's not only the scale, I mean, the scale is radically different, no? To become from a scale of a, let's say, exhibition, to go to the scale of a layer of a part of the city, but also your role becomes different, because in certain aspects you are opening up questions or provoking, you know, or highlighting through that exhibition in St. Petersburg, provoking something like an urban condition that you are able to read and actually kind of graphically present, that it becomes powerful and really present. And not only by provoking, but also suggesting this kind of imaginative change, you could twist also the mind of, let's say, public administrators to think as those as a reality. But my question to the green roofs, the system of green roofs, like a layer of a park, I think it's extremely interesting. But how will you convince them if you couldn't get through the weight of the extra aluminum chairs on the Swiss roof of the museum to persuade them to get this extra weight for the green roofs on the existing buildings, which we know that even with the new green roof systems are still quite a challenge in order to be thoroughly executed on the existing buildings.
I think the main challenge is still ahead. And but I do believe as soon as public, responsible people and everyone involved see direct benefit, it's possible to find a way. And the same it's in Vienna. People ready to pay for the apartment with balcony twice more than for the apartment without balcony. So all the Altbaus now is covered by the new built balconies, which is based on this like thin metal structures and which holds this weight of the like multiple story of balconies. That's just a very easy technical solution. And the problem is not the problem. The point is we can send rockets to the space while we cannot build a small bridge in between two buildings. As soon as there is enough public interest and will, we can do everything. And more than that, we're not engineers. I believe some good engineer would solve this problem much better than us. We just believe it's possible and we know it's possible. And we're ready to convince and to work with all the other representatives and participants of the protest. But it just, the first and the most important step to change the perception of certain topic, to make people look different at the familiar aspects. And that's the hardest probably point.
Yeah, I think also some of our proposals, of course, it's like really hard to get into the reality. But what I want to advocate for is that heating up the fountains is much easier. They can do it faster. But also, yeah, architecture is slow and takes years to build it. But like after a certain like really good provocation, like the same High Line in New York, like back in days, like a certain little group of enthusiasts just saved it. They were like called Friends of High Line. And now, I mean, it's another topic. What kind of space is this now? But now every city wants, we want our own High Line. And now it became sort of like, okay, like we have a precedent, everyone wants it. So yeah, we gotta stay conceptual and provocative and try to bring it into reality. And all this like little ideas, all the public engagements, all little media buzz like helps.
But is it a name for you to like use exhibitions also to not only provoke, but then to go further, to change certain political agendas? I mean, there are certain practices we discuss also in the lecture series as Rotor that use the exhibition very explicitly then to provoke and to engage in political discussions to change certain circumstances and regulations. Is this something that you aim for, or maybe now also after this experience you want to like focus more on to use the exhibition to bring something in or change something in a certain context of or building an environment?
Yeah, of course. We, all of us, aiming to go to politics next year. No, that's a joke, but even though we do understand that all the changes comes from there, and here we more have to like rise these topics, make it more visible, makes it present, and hoping that one of the politicals trying to get certain points would just take our ideas and implement them in the city. That's actually our strategy. But speaking about next steps, as soon as we have a possibility, we do so. And like there are several projects, some of them now under construction, when we try to challenge certain elements of the buildings or elements of the district and look at them differently. And then sometimes it's the process which we never know where is our limits, because we never believe, because we work with different people, and some of them, they just smile at you at the first meeting and then nothing happens. Some of them smile you at the first meeting, second meeting, and then something happens. And so every time when we're doing something really interesting to us, we never know, like, will we manage? So you never know by yourself where are the limits. Sometimes we are lucky and something happens. So, but that's true. As soon as there is a bit of interest, like if Basel Stadtplanamt would approach us now and propose us to design this bridge as a showcase study, how to connect to rooftops, we would do it with pleasure, and I can assure it would work. It's just not every conceptual speculative idea receives such a, like, so well received by the responsible, like by the people in charge. So yeah, as soon as we have a chance, we push it further, but also just raising this topic, make it visible, present, hoping that if not us, someone else will change. It's as well very satisfying.
Okay, there is a parallel discussion in the chat, I see, and Leonid is answering, so we don't have to do this in spoken words. Are there any other questions?
Sorry, Eva, if you want, you can make it out loud. It's not a problem. I didn't mean to steal this question from you. Feel free to ask it, or we can discuss something else, whatever you prefer.
Is there any other question from anyone who is still with us listening and would like to pose the question verbally through the video? You should just put on your camera and then you can ask the question. So Eva can see you, otherwise we don't know who wants to ask the question.
And if anyone wants to, like, us to scroll back through the presentation to any slide that you want to look at or like ask about, we can do that too.
Now I have tons of questions for you, but if no one is asking, I can always ask you.
And you don't have to turn on the video if you don't like. It's also okay only to turn on the micro. It's also okay. But yeah, okay.
Do we have any questions? No. Yeah, I was about to ask you, because I think we have seen many projects in Biennale, in Giardini, where they try to challenge the status quo of the pavilions, which they work basically as embassies, no? Because they have a very similar legislation and as the embassies. So basically, it's a Russian territory on the Italian soil, and you have certain certain potential to use that in regards not to the Italian legislation, but actually your own, from your own country. But I was really impressed with your challenging the entrance and allowing this kind of border condition of your particular pavilion to open up. And somehow, so I'm wondering, did you really get this permission and you are really going to push it through in 2021, or if this was your proposal and you are still in the negotiation zone?
It's all stayed under, like, in the discussion, and it was actually competition. We were shortlisted and then not selected. So I cannot reply. I mean,
no, basically,
I hope but it wasn't really like seriously implemented.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there was a desire from the organizers of this. It was a very big for the Russian architectural scene. It was a very big and important competition. When I think almost every, in architect, if he was not too busy at the moment, he participated in this almost like as a statement. And there was like I don't know, several architects shortlisted, and a very nice architect who theoretically got the project, but then the COVID stopped it all. So this project is not being implemented. But I think it was a very important moment for our scene, because I remember the moment of the announcement of this competition was almost like as if it was, I don't know, like previously it would be 9/11 memorial or like a Guggenheim competition, something like a historical competition, at least for the Russian architectural scene. And also knowing that the Russian architectural scene, as we are all three abroad, there was also many people who are based abroad and who also participated in it. And I think this is a very important thing to basically rethink the pavilions. And I think this was one of the best points to open it to the city, to stop treating it as an exclusive architectural kind of a gimmick where only architects can see some architectural models and speak with architects and then meet some architectural related clients and some architecture related or journalists. It should become just like a public space, and it's in this sense it's a continuation of the concept we had for Forum Basel and for some other projects. So I mean, I think if all the rest things, they are aesthetical and architectural decisions, but this was, I think, a smart decision which could have been implemented in any projects in a way, like no matter if our project was chosen or not.
I would just probably add here that when we say in public space, it's probably just this kind of word we use to define exactly this transformable space where different type of actors could participate and operate, because to us, like one of the measure points which we're speaking about, spontaneous growth of the city and controllable, that we have to learn how to pack more and more process within one space. And pavilion, it's not only about Russian pavilion, it was generally a challenge about all the museums, about especially these white box museums and so on, how to organize process in there that they would be used more efficient, like in a more efficient way, and that would save up some square meters of unbuilt land. Because I was like absolutely shocked when I found out that, for example, in Austria, not the biggest country in Europe, every day, like size of two football fields gets built, like kind of transferred from green land to construction land, and that's insane. If we would imagine how many football fields we transfer only this year, so we have to really change it. And if we want our kids to have a bit of greenery around.
Exactly.
Yeah, coming back to the...
Sorry, my question was more really into the Biennale of Venezia question, because I think when you would be discussing, we wanted to challenge in 2014 the regimes of timetable. So we wanted to allow our contributors or participants in our Biennale pavilion to stay overnight. But then after, I don't know, 3 long negotiations with the Biennale as an institution, due to the contracts of the security, we were denied this opportunity. So I was extremely shocked that you were allowed to open another entrance to the whole thing. But I think it's worth the challenge and try each time, because I think these rules are, of course, always there for challenging. And another thing, that the whole Giardini area, we were trying to readdress exactly the problem that you mentioned now, together with TU Wien students in 2016. So I think it's a really an important, let's say, year in which we try to, because imagine there are almost no trees in Venice, and this is one of the biggest parks, and the residents are not allowed to enter. In the majority of the year, this is empty or under construction or under deconstruction of the pavilions. And it's really a huge problem of non-accessible public space, which needs to be addressed in many cases. Yeah, so I'm very glad that you kind of opened up that with your project. Sorry, Nikolai, I kind of jumped in.
Oh, actually, thank you for your comment. I was thinking to go back to the same theme, just like share the thought that, yes, it is definitely so true to work within the institution. There's so many rules, there are so many different voices behind the curtain. There are like so many like people that affect the process and so on. And it's kind of interesting how we always present ourselves like of being provocative and like, let's do this, let's do that, propose to change things, but like somehow in a way we do act within like confirmed space of provocation that we have to be like approved for the provocation, and there is really hard to find a way for like a spontaneous provocation that is sort of like hacks the situation and like finds its way by itself into the situation. It's
great conclusion. So I would suggest, Eva, you somehow wrap.
Okay.
Okay.
Leonid, please.
Again. No, I just wanted to say that we didn't hear Tina, but I think everyone understood what she wanted to say.
Okay. Yes, so I would like to thank you again for this lecture, for this reflection on your exhibition projects. I think it opened up your really idealistic approach towards architecture and your utopian view on our world, which gives us hope in these times. So thank you again. And yeah, hope to see you soon at TU Wien at some other point with the midterm, or we are curious what you're doing with your design course.
Thank you, Eva, for
we're curious too, to be honest.
And Tina and all the 150 participants for the participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting. It was very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, all the students. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everyone stay safe and bye-bye.
Bye.